What's up everybody and welcome to another easy math video. Now today our focus is going to be on factors and greatest common factors. Let's get started. What is a factor? Well, factors of a number are values that can be multiplied or divided evenly into that number. Now once again that sounds very complicated and wordy, but if I show you an example, it's going to make a lot more sense. Okay, so what are factors of 45? This will make a lot more sense to you. So basically what factors of 45 are going to be are numbers that we can use to multiply to create 45. Okay, and what I'm going to show you how to do today is create something called a factor rainbow, which will allow you to find all the factors of a number. Okay, and all you need basically, you don't really need anything. You just need maybe a pencil and paper, and you could use a calculator as well. Okay, so, but that's about it. Okay, let's get started first. So the first number we always use in a factor rainbow is the number 1. Okay, because we can because 1 times the number itself, in this case 45, are always going to equal 45. So we're looking for numbers that we can multiply together to give us 45, and those are going to be numbers that are factors of 45. So once again, the number 1 is a factor of any number, and so is 45. Okay. Next, after we've done that, so it's pretty straightforward. You put 1 in the number itself. Those are always going to be factors. Next, after we've done 1, I'd usually go to the number 2. But if you know your divisibility rules and you look at the number 45, well, you know off the bat, it is an odd number. It's not an even number, which means 2 cannot go into it evenly. Anything that we multiply 2 by is going to be an even number. 45 is not, so 2 does not work. Next, we'll try the number 3. I know right away, actually, myself, just because I'm pretty aware of, a lot of my times tables, that 3 can be multiplied to make 45. If you don't know, what you can do is use your calculator, and the number that you are thinking of, whether it's a factor or not, all you got to do is take the number, in this case 45, and divide it by that number that you are guessing whether or not it's a factor. And if you take 45 and divide it by 3 on your calculator, you'll see that it equals 15, which means that 3 times 15 gives us 45. So in that case, both 3 and 15 are in fact factors of 45. Next, after 3, I'd move on to the next number, which would be 4, obviously. 4 does not work. I can tell you that once again, using my knowing my divisibility rules. If you don't know your divisibility rules, we are going to have a video on that coming out real shortly. So I definitely recommend looking into that because it will help you out tremendously. But I can tell you, when it comes to the number 4, any number that we multiply 4 by, it's always going to be an even number, just like 2. So because 45 is not an even number, it can't be divisible by 4, and as a result, 4 can't be a factor of 45. Now next, after 4, we'll move on to 5. And our divisibility rules of 5 tell us that any number that we multiply 5 by is either going to end with a 5 or a 0. And 45 does end with a 5. So if you take 45 and divide it by 5 on your calculator, should equal 9, because 5 times 9 gives us 45. So in that case, both 5 and 9 are factors of 45. Now then we'd move on to 6. Okay, I can tell you right away, 6 does not divide evenly into 45. Neither does 7, and neither does 8. So then we are done. Okay, because we've covered all of the numbers. We've just covered all the numbers between 5 and 9. So now our factor rainbow is done. And here are all our factors. Okay, so you can do this with pretty much any number. Most numbers are going to have, more than more than two factors. Okay, but there are some numbers out there that don't really have many factors, and in fact some numbers only have 1 and itself as factors, and in those cases we call those numbers prime numbers. Any other number that has more factors than just 1 or itself, we call those composite numbers. So in this case 45 is a composite number because it has more factors than just 1 in itself. Okay, hope that makes a little bit more sense on now what a factor is. Basically a factor, factors of a number are numbers that we can use to multiply to make that number. Okay. So next, now that we know what a factor is, what are common factors? So common factors are factors that are shared by two or more numbers. So in this case, I'll give you another example here. We have two numbers, 12 and 18. I can tell you right now, neither of those are prime numbers. They do have, a few factors. They have more than just 1 and themselves as factors. So we're going to look for any common numbers. We're going to look to see if either of them have factors in common. And those would be what we call common factors. Okay, so once again, let's try with our factor rainbow. We'll start with 12. Okay, so I always start at 1 and the number itself. So 1 and 12. Okay, because 1 times 12 gives us 12, obviously. Move on to 2. 12 is an even number, so 2 is definitely going to be a factor. 2 times 6 gives me 12. Okay, next, move on to 3. I know personally that I can multiply 3 by another number to make 12. But if you didn't know that, once again, all you got to do is take the original number, 12 here, and divide it by the number that you're trying to figure out whether it's a factor or not. If you take 12 and divide it by 3, should give you 4, because 3 times 4 gives us 12. So we're done now, because the only number between, we've covered all, there's no more numbers between 3 and 4. So we're done. Now let's move on and try the same thing for the number 18. So I'm going to start again with my factor rainbow. I'll do 1 on one side and 18 on the other, because 1 times 18 is obviously 18. Next, I'll move on to 2. 18 is an even number, so 2 is going to be a factor. 2 times 9 actually gives me 18. And if you didn't know that, all you had to do is take 18 divided by 2. If you get a whole number, which in this case you would get 9, that means that 2 times 9 gives us 18, and they are both factors. Next, I'll move on to 3. 3 times 6 gives us 18. Okay, and 4 does not, you could try 4 again by dividing 18 divided by 4. You're not going to get a whole number. You're going to get decimals, so that doesn't work. 18 does not end in a 0 or a 5, so it's not divisible by 5, so that's not going to work. So we're done now. Okay, so we have all of the factors. So now, if you might have already noticed, but they do have factors in common. We don't usually, we wouldn't circle the number 1, because it's pretty straightforward that all numbers are, have 1 as a factor. But we can circle all the other common factors. So they both have 2. So I'm going to circle both of those. Okay. They both have 3. So I'm going to circle both of those. 4 is not a factor of 18, so that doesn't work. 6 is a factor. So I'm going to circle 6. So now, I think that's it. 12, 9, 18. None of those are shared. So now you've seen here that I have circled all of the common factors. Now the next thing that I was going to get into was what is the greatest common factor. So the greatest common factor is the greatest whole number that divides evenly into 2 or more other whole numbers. Once again, sounds really wordy, might be confusing, but if we go back to our last example that we did together, I've circled all of the common factors, but out of those 3 shared common factors, which one is the greatest? Which one is the largest one? Well, in this case, it's 6. So 6 is the greatest common factor between 12 and 18. Now, I've set up here one more example for us to do together. Okay, so we're going to look for the greatest common factor between 16 and 24. So we'll try our factor rainbow again. We always start with 1 and the number itself. So 1 and 16. Okay, that gives us 16. 2 works because 16 is an even number. Any even number has 2 as a factor. 2 times 8 gives us 16. 3, if you divide 16 by 3, it's not going to go in evenly. You're going to get a decimal, so that doesn't work. 4 does work, okay? 4 times 4 gives us 16. So I'm just going to write the numbers 4s twice, okay? Just so we have the rainbow, but yeah, you only have it once there. Obviously, that's it. We're done, okay? 5 does not go in, 6 does not go in, 7 does not go in, so we're done. Next, let's do the factor rainbow for the number 24. And always, once again, we start with the number 1. Well, 1 times 24 gives us 24. 24 is an even number, so 2 is going to be a factor. 2 times 12 gives us 24. Next, we have 3. Okay, 3 times 8 actually gives us 24. And once again, you could check by dividing. So if you didn't know that, you could take 24 divided by 3. Sorry, I made my rainbow a little small here, so we are getting kind of tight for space. But like I was saying, sorry, if you took 24 and you divide it by 3, you'd get 8. So that means 3 times 8 gives us 24. Those are both factors. I'll do the number 4 next. And 4 times 6 actually gives us 24. And now the only number that we could check between 4 and 6 is 5, and 5 does not go into 24 evenly. So now let's look here and let's circle. Let's underline all of the common factors. Once again, we're not going to bother with 1 because I think that every number, we know that every number has 1 as a factor. So we'll underline 2. 16 doesn't have 3 as a factor, but it does have 4 as a factor. Okay, so we'll underline that. 16 doesn't have 6 as a factor, but it does have 8 as a factor. So we'll underline 8. And sorry that it got so tight here once again. And I think that's pretty much it. 16 doesn't have 12 as a factor or 24 as a factor. So out of the... sorry, I didn't underline 4. I should have done that. So out of the 3 shared factors, which are 2, 4, and 8, 2, 4, and 8, you see here, which one is the greatest one? Well, it's pretty obvious. 8 is the greatest common factor between 16 and 24. So there you have it. Now, why is knowing this helpful? I get that question a lot from people. Why do I need to know this? So I'll show you why here. So if you looked at our previous video on multiples and lowest common multiple, there were some real world applications shared with you where lowest common multiple is used. Greatest common factor is actually used very similarly. So if you want to take a look at that video to see some of the real world uses, works the same way. But specifically, people use this when dealing with fractions. So I'm going to show you how that works. Okay, so when we use greatest common factor to help us simplify fractions. Okay, so if I wanted to, so here we have the number 4 and the number 8, 4 over 8. And if you have a general idea of some simple fractions, you should know right off the bat that we can simplify this number. Okay, but what the greatest common factor helps you do is simplify it to its simplest form right away. Okay, like these are both even numbers. I could keep dividing both top and bottom by 2, to simplify them, but I'd have to take more than one step. But if I find out what the greatest common factor is between the two, I could divide the top and bottom by that greatest common factor, and I would automatically get this fraction in its most simple or more simplified form. So quickly, let's just, we could make another factor rainbow, but I can tell you right off the bat, the greatest common factor between 4 and 8 is actually 4. So if you needed your factor rainbow to figure that out, you could totally do that. You'd figure out that 4 is the greatest common factor. And then what you do is you divide the top number and the bottom number by 4. Okay, I always say, and you probably heard this before elsewhere, whatever you do to the top of a fraction, you must also do to the bottom. Okay, so 4 goes into 4 once, and 4 goes into 8 twice. So its simplest form is 1/2, which I think most of you could have already figured out on your own, but this works with more complex and larger fractions when we're dealing with bigger numbers. Okay, so once again, one of the most usable ways that we can utilize the greatest common factor is to help us simplify fractions. Okay, and like I said, you can go look at our other video on multiples and lowest common multiples, and you'll see some other real world applications in which we use greatest common factor. It's pretty much the same as lowest common multiple. All right, guys, I hope this video was helpful. Please give what you learned here today a try. If you have any feedback, please leave them in the comments. Please like and subscribe to our videos. And if you, once again, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section. And yeah, give it a shot, guys.